All right, today we're doing the events leading to the Civil War. Make sure that you fill in everything as we go through on your notes page. We will definitely have some readings and go in depth on each one of these scenarios. But these are your intro notes, and make sure that you also take care of your quiz online after you complete the notes. All right, so first thing is sectional differences. Remember your sectionalism map and how the United States was clearly divided into three main sections: the North, the South, and the West. And now we are particularly dealing with your issues and differences between the North and the South. So the North still has that industrial economy. They are against secession. They want to make sure they maintain the Union. And they are for tariffs because your tariff is your tax on imported goods, and therefore it's going to protect the industry in your northern factories. The South has an agricultural economy. Okay, you're still dealing with King Cotton. They're very much dependent on slavery because of that. They are for states' rights and obviously against tariffs because they don't want to pay that extra for the manufactured goods that they don't really produce in the southern economy. All right, so your effects of these differences is that they're going to exaggerate other problems that exist between the North and the South, and they become your basis for future disagreements. So constantly, especially your elected officials, are going to do things and make decisions based on what's going to benefit their particular section of the United States. All right, next thing is going to be your Compromise of 1850 and the Fugitive Slave Law. So to try and keep a balance of your slave and free states, we again have another compromise in which California is allowed to come in as a free state. Texas comes in as a slave state. Your slave trade is going to be outlawed in Washington, D.C. A lot of people thought that it was just a little off to have really slave markets in your nation's capital. So they outlaw it going on in D.C. And your northerners now, as part of your fugitive slave law, have to help catch runaway slaves, or they can be fined or jailed if they are protecting and found protecting some runaway slaves. Your system is very much going to be rigged in favor of your slave owners because there's going to be more incentive to find that an African American person who may in fact be free is a slave than rather think that they're actually a free person. So some that are free blacks are in many cases going to be enslaved under this fugitive slave law. All right, so your effects of the Compromise of 1850 and your fugitive slave law. First, that the North is pleased by California being a free state and your slave trade ending in D.C. Please add those two bullets under where you were going to write pleases the North, because those are the two things that the North is very happy about. Okay. Now, the fugitive slave law is going to please the South and anger the North. Make a notation of that as well, since it doesn't show you to write in fugitive slave law itself. So, fugitive slave law pleases the South because they can get their runaway slaves back. But it's going to anger the North because, again, in some cases, you're going to have free blacks that are going to be taken. The system is rigged, and it's going to maintain slavery. Okay. Because of the law, your escapees have to now go to Canada, where they had just escaped up to the north, to some of your northern states. They have to go either to Canada or to Mexico on the Underground Railroad. Again, your free blacks are in danger of being taken as slaves because of the way that the system is rigged. The next thing is Uncle Tom's Cabin. And Uncle Tom's Cabin is a fictional anti-slavery novel. The author is Harriet Beecher Stowe. Lincoln's going to call her the little woman who started the Great Big War. You can think of Uncle Tom's Cabin as the big book club book of the year. Okay, so people all over the North especially are starting to read this book, and their eyes become open to many of the horrors of slavery. In the story, the hero of his story is a slave, and he dies after being cruelly whipped, but he forgives his master after that whipping and in the process of him dying as a result of it. Okay, so your effects of Uncle Tom's Cabin, because that's that book club of the year book. The North becomes aware of the harshness of slavery. People who had been apathetic, now that they've read this novel, suddenly begin to care about the issue. So it's no longer oh, that's a Southern issue. Oh, that's so far away from us. It becomes something that is pressing in their minds. The South, excuse me, is going to call this abolitionist propaganda. That abolitionists are lying, they are exaggerating the treatment of slaves. This kind of stuff really doesn't happen down here. So they're completely against this novel. Next up is the Kansas-Nebraska Act. And remember, we've talked about the Northwest Ordinance. You've had these compromises on territorial expansion and the expansion of slavery. So in trying to build the railroad, your transcontinental railroad, we have got to organize your territories of Kansas and Nebraska. What they do with the Kansas and Nebraska Act is allow popular sovereignty, or votes by the people in the territory itself, to decide the issue of slavery in those areas. This is completely against your Missouri Compromise, which set the line of where slavery could no longer exist. And now you're allowing popular sovereignty. So your effects are, obviously, this overturns the Missouri Compromise. Your Republican Party is going to form to stop the spread of slavery because, hey, that was what the Missouri Compromise was supposed to do, was stop it from spreading further north. And here we are with a situation where it could potentially be in Kansas and Nebraska. Fighting between your pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers in Kansas in particular becomes known as Bleeding Kansas. You're going to have an influx of people who don't even reside in Kansas at all that come in to try to vote on the issue of whether slavery can exist in that territory. The next cause of the Civil War is the Dred Scott versus Sandford decision. Dred Scott's a slave, and he is suing for his freedom in the U.S. Supreme Court. The court is going to have a pretty interesting ruling. First, they say that black people are not citizens, even free blacks. Okay, not citizens at all, so really you can't even move up to the Supreme Court and try to sue for anything. It says that slaves are property. Okay, not people, not citizens, but property. And as such, property can be taken anywhere because the Fifth Amendment protected property rights. I should go back and say that Dred Scott had been taken by his master into some free territory, and so Dred Scott was like, oh, hold on, I'm in free territory, then I should be a free man. The Supreme Court saying, no, you're property, you can be taken anywhere, including free territory, and you are still property. So your effects of this, it basically says that your Missouri Compromise is ruled unconstitutional. Congress can't ban slavery in the territories as a result of that. The South is overjoyed with the Dred Scott decision, but many of your Northerners are now going to join the Republican Party, which again came to existence in order to stop the spread of slavery. So it puts more momentum behind a group of individuals who are trying to stop the spread of slavery. All right, next up you have your Lincoln-Douglas debates, and you wouldn't think it'd be such a big issue because it's a Senate race in Illinois, right? So you have candidates for senator in Illinois, Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas. Abraham Lincoln is with the Republican Party. He's against the spread of slavery. He becomes known as Honest Abe. Okay, Stephen Douglas is on the other side. He is a Democrat. Okay, so he's for the Democratic Party. He favors popular sovereignty and that people should be able to choose. And he becomes known as the Little Giant. They have several debates in this Senate campaign process. Douglas ends up winning the election for senator, but some statements that he makes during these debates is going to have him lose future support from Southerners, which doesn't bode well for his future aspirations of becoming president of the United States. Lincoln, on the other hand, he loses the election for Senate, but he gains a lot of popularity nationwide with the things that he's saying, and ultimately that helps him win the presidential election in 1860. Our next cause is the attack on Harper's Ferry. You have an abolitionist named John Brown who's going to lead an attack on a U.S. arsenal. An arsenal is a place where weapons are stored. So this arsenal is located in Harper's Ferry in Virginia, and he wants to seize the weapons from the arsenal for a slave rebellion. He wants to launch a massive slave rebellion. Robert E. Lee from the U.S. Army is going to capture John Brown. Okay, A lot of times people think of Robert E. Lee just on the Confederate side, but he had been in the U.S. Army, okay, even in the Mexican-American War. That's where he gained a lot of his experience. So Brown is going to end up being convicted of treason for trying to launch this slave rebellion, and he's going to be executed. Some people in the North see him as a hero and as a martyr, and a martyr is someone who dies for a cause. So he's put on this pedestal to many people in the North, and in the South, they're absolutely horrified that Northerners are going to support someone who is a criminal, who has committed an act of treason. All right, one of our final things that is going to lead us to the Civil War and to the separation in the United States is the election of Lincoln. So Lincoln's going to win the election of 1860 for many reasons, but primarily because there are 4 candidates. So the Democratic Party is split. They couldn't pick one candidate for the party, so they have one person who many in the North favor and one in the South that many people in the South favor. So he gets a lot of votes from some of your northern states who have larger populations, and that gives him more electoral votes once you have that split within the Democratic Party. Now, when Lincoln runs for office, he opposes slavery, but he promises not to free the slaves in the South. He is a member of the Republican Party. He just wants to prevent slavery from spreading further west. He is not pushing for the abolishment of slavery. All right, now, some of your effects. People in the South don't believe Lincoln. Even though he's known as Honest Abe, they're like, yeah, no, don't believe you. And they fear that he is going to abolish slavery. So, South Carolina, remember we talked about South Carolina during Jackson's administration. South Carolina's like, yeah, we've had enough. And they're the first to secede, and 6 other states are going to follow with them or withdraw from the Union. Although Lincoln wins the election in November, James Buchanan is still the president when your states begin to leave the United States of America. Okay, so it's as a result of Lincoln's election, but he has yet to be inaugurated when your states start to secede. All right, so your 7 states that initially secede from the Union are going to form the Confederate States of America. They're going to name Jefferson Davis as their president. President Buchanan says that it's illegal, but he doesn't take any action against them. You know, he's on his way out. Let this be the next guy's problem. So, make sure that you have these completely done, that you take your quiz online soon, and we will continue to discuss your causes of the Civil War and ultimately the Civil War and Reconstruction in class the next time I see you.